Thank you and welcome back, everybody. It's my privilege to introduce our next keynote speakers, Kate Pahl and Stephen Pahl. By way of brief biographical introduction, Kate is Professor of Arts and Literature at Manchester Metropolitan University and heads up the Education and Social Research Institute. And Steve is an artist and doctoral researcher and has worked often as an artist in residence and has collaborated with Kate on a really great project we're going to hear about. And he's one half of the artist collaboration Polytechnic. And they're both involved in this great book, Living Literacies, which I've read and been incredibly well informed by. And I think I just want to say that those of us interested in media education and literacy and doing research in that kind of intersection really can benefit so much from this talk, because the ways of working with participants in communities, you know, using arts-based methods collaboratively, all of that really great practice in literacy research really should be more prominent in media literacy research, I think. So over to Kate and Stephen. I'm really excited and delighted that you've joined us. And I will now stop talking, mute, and hand over.
Yeah, thanks, Julian. You were very modest then, because you didn't actually say that you have a book called The Uses of Media Literacy, and that it's a really good book. So I'll just do a little mini plug for that really good book. And also, I think there's something about this conference that can I just say I love this conference? I think it's a very great way of thinking about practice and theory. I've just been at a session on that, and actually thinking about change and transformational change. It's a space which is very inclusive, and I loved all the talks so far, which have really helped me think about the work we're doing in education to challenge particularly this, I'm going to say, this dreadful report that came out yesterday. I feel like you've got a space here which is beginning to make those challenges. So I'm just very grateful to the organisers and all the keynotes, which I loved. I loved all of you. And I hope ours is going to be interesting. I'm going to start sharing a screen. What's going to happen is I'm going to talk and Steve is going to be the person telling the stories. Stories seems to be a good theme for this conference. And now that's not the right... sorry, I'm now going to escape the screen and go right to the beginning. Sorry, I'm going to stop sharing and go back to the beginning. Sorry about this, Julian, but I seem to have got into the wrong bit of the start.
It's
yeah, it's all right. I'm doing it again. Everybody, thanks for being patient. It's always a bit scary, this bit, isn't it? So there we are, share. And some people have done it really well so far. Okay, so the title of our talk is Empowering Youth Co-Production, Taking Young People Seriously. That title actually comes from a project called Taking Yourself Seriously, which was looking at the issue of how do you actually listen to young people. I think our work is probably not media education, but it's engaged practice in communities. And you'll see as we talk, and I hope, I've started to worry about whether I'm loud enough. And of course, it's just the cat who can tell me if I'm loud enough. So I hope I'm speaking clearly. And well done, the people for whom it's 3 a.m. It's amazing. So we're going to be doing the talk in this way. I'm going to be doing the slides and Steve's going to be telling the stories. We mentioned the Living Literacies book, and we are going to be talking to that book. We're also going to be talking about a project called Feeling Odd in the World of Education, in which children made films about their experiences. And that's really where we're going to centre our talk. Steve, are we on track? Am I doing all right?
Yeah, you're doing brilliant. I just love it, the fact that PowerPoint is the bane of everyone's lives in reality and virtually. It's great. It kind of crosses into the world of Zoom. Like showing films with sound is just as big a problem in real life as on Zoom. So yeah.
Yeah. Normally Steve has to do the technical thing and he can't. It's only the cat. Anyway, so today we're going to talk about research with young people. We're going to ask, how do you take the outcome of young people's work, and in our case, filmmaking, seriously? We are going to link to the work of Raymond Williams. We're going to think about what is to come and building shared futures. And we're also, we work often with ideas about hope. we've used the work of Ernst Bloch in the past, but we're always trying to think about building hopeful futures. And we're going to talk in this talk about the idea of living literacies, the idea of young people in research creation. And just as a heads up, daydreaming is our next project. So we're living in that obviously hopeful space, but there's a lot to do. So, Steve, tell me if I've missed your bits out, because you've got stories to tell, but I don't think we've got to your first story yet.
Okay, yeah, you're doing really well. I mean,
okay,
that good.
Okay. So this is the living literacies approach. One of the things we're interested in is when you do something, you make a literacy event or practice, like you do a piece of writing, you write a text. One of the things that we argued in that book is that there isn't one thing that you can say, this is it. And I think that's partly the digital, I think that's partly the nature of speech and writing. And I think that's partly the nature of how we are in the real world as opposed to how academic knowledge is created. But one of the things we argued in that book is the idea of literal meaning within a singular notion of communication isn't something that happens when you're sitting in an adventure playground in Sheffield. And that's one of the things we did, is sit in an adventure playground in Sheffield. And I'm the one with the hat on. And Steve, are you in that picture? I don't know.
Probably not, no. Probably hiding somewhere.
So do you want to tell the story of the pirate ship now?
Well, we chose the story of the pirate ship because we actually wrote about it in Living Literacies. And I think we've used it in the past as an example. And I often talk about it in relation to working with Kate and how the idea of the text got opened up into something that felt much more, something that had much more in common with the way that I saw art working in communities, but in art galleries and all over the place. So I was really doing lots and lots of work with academics and using arts methods. I got very frustrated in how everything just seemed to be pigeonholed to a very literal meaning that was often fixed. So even if you weren't using the written text, it was often like a child might do a drawing and you try and find a sort of literal meaning in it. Whereas when you work in a more sort of the world of arts practice, it's much more about feelings. And I think it often gets called pre-symbolic meaning. So it's it means something before it becomes a symbol for something else. And we used this pirate ship, which I built 3 years ago now in my back garden, because it seemed to be layered with loads and loads of meanings for different people. And we just talk about it as part of the bigger text of the project. In the book, Living Literacies, I read it the other day. I've not even shared it with my dad, but my dad got diagnosed with very severe liver disease while I was building this ship. And it was a very bleak day where he thought he had about 4 months to live. But he's still with us. I've sent him the book chapter actually, because I never even shared it with him, but he's called Gordon. So we called the ship the Lucky Gordon after him, because he's still with us and still reasonably fit, and he's just had his vaccine at 85. But I think that when we talk about what things mean and we talk about texts, the working with Kate really opened up this idea that a text wasn't just words on a page, and also that it could be something that didn't have to have a fixed meaning. So the pirate ship now is, it's getting older, the kids are playing on it, it's been utterly adopted by the playground, so it's a feature now. People sort of talk about the pirate ship. When it was new, it was all about newness, it was all about investment in the community, it was all about something happening. Currently it's flying Ai Weiwei's refugee flag, which is for the international recognition of refugees, and anyway, there's lots of refugees use the playground. So it's just this idea that the meaning continues to be reinterpreted and flows into communities, and I think that's what I take from the new literacy studies, and that's what I try and work with in my ideas, and I think that's what brings us together, and that'll do. Yeah, it was
yes. So
people there.
Yeah, moving on. And the Adventure Playground is situated in Pittsmore and Sheffield. Anybody feel like dropping by? Obviously, with COVID regulations, they can still come, can't they? Because it's 6 people now. So yeah, come and see the playground. It's great. These are some of the things we thought you need to think about when you think about taking young people, particularly young people's filmmaking, seriously. We're not going to show a film by a child, partly because we've done it in the past and we've written a chapter actually called Can You Fast Forward to the Good Bits? But adults find it quite difficult to take seriously what children produce. Children produce things that aren't necessarily things that adults recognize either. We also resist the social science focus on this idea of data, that you have a kind of bite-sized piece of thing, whether it's a multimodal text, something you can analyze, that can then be analyzed. We also have been quite critical of this idea of children as researchers without recognizing the power differentials in classrooms. We worked with children in years 4, 5, and 6, and the teachers are really great, but there are issues about being in school and doing what you're supposed to do in school. We've worked with the idea of ethics in a very active way. We've tried to include the idea of no and options to say no to researchers, and also to really embed the idea of what being in a research project means, which means that the children have come to conferences and presented their work so as to get an idea of what saying yes to a conference presentation is. But we've had to deal with school timetables, COVID lockdowns. The last time we were in this school where we're going to talk about our project was in January. We both had these weird coughs. We coughed away. And then we're going back in July, but that's obviously got in the way. One of the things we find difficult is knowing where the work is or what the work is, and not knowing what the work is. And I think the basic fact is that we often lose control, and yet that's actually what the work is. So that's what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, something there, Kate. Do you think?
Yeah.
I was just going to add to that. I think because it's a media conference, hopefully we'll have some sympathetic ears to the idea that I have a political commitment about young people being creators as well as consumers of media, and I feel really angry when young people's production is not taken with full integrity and it's treated as data, especially within social science. And there always seems to be a little bit of a deceit within that. Oh, we're making a film, but then the way it gets used is in many ways to support ideas that maybe don't originate for the young people, or the counter narratives of what the young people are trying to say within the film. So I think there's a political element to that idea of seeing the media as something that has integrity and treating it as such. Kate's wanting to tell a story about can you fast forward to the good bits? And I think if we're any of you, I know that I've been attending a bit of the conference. I know there's quite a few people involved in media production, and if you've ever tried to show something that you've made at a conference, it just seems 10 times longer than when you made it. And that can you fast forward to the good bits? It's very sort of, it happens a lot. Can you fast forward to the bit that makes your point, rather than allowing a piece of media to unfold on its own terms, is really another thing I really wanted to sort of stress as well, as we're at a media conference, which is great. We often do educational conferences, so it's great to be invited to do a keynote at a media conference.
And that was actually the title of our chapter, which we'll give a reference for at the end, with Roberta Communion and Sarita Malik, about community filmmaking. And I think it was from an example when you were in Newcastle, Steve, weren't you? And you did a film on coal mining, and they said, can you fast forward to the good bits?
It was a film about the Battle of Orgreave, which I was really proud of. And actually, it's the same at conferences. We'll probably overrun today, but, everybody takes, it's 10 minutes each, everyone takes 11 minutes. So you end up, if you're last, you end up with 4 minutes, like a 7-minute film. It was just a train crash. But I just felt like really sad at the end of it. I think people don't give media the space to breathe. You have to. I always feel like within academic educational research, but people are looking for linguistic meaning, so they're really wanting to hear what people are saying. They're almost having it in vivo as it comes out of people's mouths. They don't sort of take a step back and think, well, what does this mean as a whole thing, rather than what linguistic meaning are people saying, or what's been spoken. So yeah, it was a bad day.
So that's so one of the things we wanted to do is to think about how do you listen and how do you put young people's films and think about how the film's made and shared. And we've done this bit of thinking and this keynote from a lot of projects in the past. We started out, one of our earliest projects, which is Living Your Life Because It's the Only Thing You've Got, was working in a school in a Gooseacre school in Goldthorpe, in an ex-mining village. And one of the things we tried to do was to encourage children to do the research. So that project, we asked children to make films and take photographs and field notes. And then we had an analytic discussion, and we put that into an article which had that title, and realized that this whole idea of cherry picking bits of children's lives didn't really work. And our projects have since looked at the idea of studio practice, looking at what artists did on community projects. We did a project called Taking Yourself Seriously, working with artists, looking at social cohesion, and a large-scale project called Imagine, which looked at the idea of cultural context of civic engagement. I think our main work, I remember a line from one of our grant applications, which was about really Raymond Williams's idea of common cultures. I think our focus is on the everyday. I've just come out of a session on, I think it was set in Stoke-on-Trent, and I'm thinking that kind of work is really where we situate ourselves in those settings, in the everyday world of playgrounds, parks, schools and community centres, with a kind of hopeful focus. So we're now going to move over to Steve, who's going to talk about concrete utopia. I love this image, Park Hill. Park Hill in Sheffield.
In our planning for this talk, and I just sort of text Kate about an hour ago and said I've got everything, but I'm not sure what I'm supposed to say in that hope bit. Well, what was that all about? So can you go back a slide, Kate? Is that okay?
Yeah.
So I probably won't talk about that. Maybe I think we've got something about hope a bit later on. But I just wanted to say, when I look at that history, I think Living Your Life project was 2010, was it, Kate?
Yeah.
And I, as we're kind of, I don't know how interesting people will be, but what strikes me when I look backwards, especially with what Kate said about the everyday, is making short films has become an everyday practice for young people now. But in 2010, it sort of wasn't, and it certainly wasn't. You weren't able to make films without going to a school media suite, which never worked. So I was thinking, God, that was the days of a digital blue. If there's any long in the tooth people that work with young people in films, a digital blue was a tiny camera that had about a 1K memory and would take 3 minutes of film that looked a bit like Super 8 film, and everybody used them in schools and they crashed everybody's computers. And then we used flip cameras for a while. And again, they were great, but we couldn't edit. And I think as we come up to the current project, which is the Odd project, we've been using a set of our own iPads and iMovie, and it has transformed what's possible to do with young people. And also, there's no kind of technical side to it. You don't have to sort of say, and this is how it works. It's just, you just get it's got a camera, it's got an editing suite, it doesn't crash, you can export the outcome. You might say make a film no longer than 2 minutes because you're not going to be able to watch them back, but there's a massive amount of change that's happened in terms of how young people can make and produce and share films. Platforms like TikTok and YouTube and things like that, it's really become part of young people's everyday to produce films, and not necessarily to produce films that emulate documentaries or films that they might see on television. It's almost like their own genre. So I wanted to say that. And then if you go on to the next slide, Kate, I think I was just going to describe this slide. And I think again it was about texts, and I think and space and place and how things have different meaning. So we made this as part of a series of work, which is a Festival of the Mind project, which is in Sheffield, which he was looking at artists working with academics. And I think it was to try and create texts in the world. So it's an old ballot box and an old Silver Cross pram. And I just parked it in front of Park Hill Flats, and half of them on the right have been done up and the other half haven't. And I think it's an example of quite a literal thing that seems to say more than it does if you decode it down to its little parts. The box is full of postcards that people had written hopes and dreams on and posted, and I sort of wheeled it around the city for a bit and took it to different events. So I think that's probably why we included it, just to re-emphasize this idea that the texts that the young people are producing equally aren't fixed, and equally we didn't really know what would be produced, and quite a few of them seem to hold some kind of meanings that you just couldn't kind of extract from what was produced and where it was produced. So I think it's that complexity of texts that we really wanted to open up and talk about. That'll do.
Yeah, and I remember there was a sign saying "I love you, will you marry me?" up on those bridges. So I think one of the things we've been thinking about is a language of description for what this kind of work is, because it's quite hard actually to say what we're doing. And what we're going to do in the next bit of this talk is to describe one of our projects, which we're doing right now, called Odd, Feeling Different in the World of Education. And we're going to try and work out what we did when we worked with children in a way that did recognise the children as researchers and filmmakers. And we're going to focus on the work and the experiences of the work. And we've just written an article which has just gone in actually yesterday to International Journal of Art and Design Education about trying to think of how we can let go of this idea of us and them and think how can we work out what is happening when we work together. So the rest of this talk is going to be thinking about that, really as a kind of offering to this Media Education Conference of what it's like to work with young people, collaborate with young people and take young people seriously. So the wonderful Feeling Odd project, we love the HRC. They funded a project back in 2017-18 called Odd, Feeling Different in the World of Education. I bet every single person in this conference says, if we all go around in our drinks later tonight and say, did you feel odd? You go, yeah, I felt really odd. Everybody feels odd in school, but nobody said that explicitly. And our project basically went into a school, Alma Park School in central Manchester, in Levenshulme, and the school said, yeah, we are going to embrace the idea of oddness. We're going to rethink the language of difference. We're going to work in a way that doesn't say there are these children who are odd, but we're going to think what is odd about the world. And this idea of fitting in and not fitting in being something that was almost within the world rather than within children. Does that make sense? Am I making sense, Steve, of our Odd project?
I think so, yeah. I don't know, it's difficult. Yeah. Normally we'd have loads of faces staring at us looking a bit confused. And
I've only got the...
We can't see anybody, so they probably, I just imagine them all kind of smiling and nodding, so yeah, you're probably okay there, Kate. What I wanted to say, I've just had a bit of a kind of, I just wanted to say before we start this bit that we've kind of focused quite a lot on the product and integrity for the product, but I think just as a caveat, we kind of mean the whole thing. We're very process oriented, we work in a very process-based way, so we're not just interested in turning out a product. When we sort of say the integrity of the work, we mean the process of producing it, not just what we produce. I just thought we might be sounding a bit product orientated, which isn't us at all. But yeah, that's a good overview, I think, of the Odd project. When we wait in the school staff room, the teachers come and pick us up and they sort of say, if they've not met us before, they say, "Oh, are you the odd people?" Which always makes us laugh and makes us feel
We've also got a team. There's Becky Shaw from Sheffield Hallam, Amanda Ravitz from the Manchester School of Art, and Rachel Holmes, the PI from the Manchester Met Education, and Joe Ray are researchers. So it's a team of us. Oh, that's the Odd Box. I really love the Odd Box. Do we want to talk about the Odd Box?
So in school there's a deaf unit for deaf young people that integrates into school. So it's one of the things about the school when I first went in that made me think about Odd a lot is every chair has and every table has a tennis ball with a hole in it put on all the legs of everything, because lots of the children wear a inducer or a hearing aid, so the screech of the chair legs is really, really, really loud. And everybody accepts that as being normal. All the songs assembly are all signed. So there's obviously these things aren't odd. I'm not saying that they're odd, but when you first come across them, they're a bit different to what you expect. And this is one of the things that the young people in the odd unit made about oddness. So they kind of they talked a lot about their implants and a lot about the way that I mean, that's again the technology that's absolutely transformed the lives of deaf young people, but is equally kind of quite so sign, you know, so it's just kind of, it was just interesting how that's what came up, and that the young people were able to express that in quite an open way and to share it with the rest of the school. So yeah.
So one of the things we did was we decided to work with young people to experience the idea of oddness in school. And what we ended up doing was making films which were made initially for 2 large-scale video projections on the outside of the school building. And we spent some time, we were given the chance to work with year groups, that's 60 children, because there were 2 year groups, actually it ended up with 3 year groups, years 4, 5, and then 6. We did end up working with the same children, but over 3 years. And that meant that we had the opportunity to really spend time with them making films. This is an image, it has got me in it, from one of the summer experiences, which was actually, we just decided to do, I think it was an odd lab, wasn't it, Steve? And we decided to do our lab. The odd labs were experimental spaces where we just made stuff and thought. And this was an outdoor play experience in the summer. It seems ages ago now. I remember the purple was really, really popular. Is there anything we need to say about that?
I don't think so. I think maybe just to say that we were working through lots and lots of different. We talked a lot about filmmaking at the beginning, but we were doing lots of hands-on stuff with materials, lots of things around trying to get the young people outside. We did a lot of poetry and word. We definitely worked across multiple ways of communication, so multiple medias. And I think that you know, part of this comes from, I've just been an artist working in education for years, so it was a sunny day and I had loads of stuff in the car, and it kind of just evolved because we might get the kids outside. But I think what I was going to say that was going to be quite clever is with the I think we've got an image of the video projections later, but I quite like to work in things that aren't fixed. So at the time I was, well, Kate was quite interested in the Fluxus movement, art movement, and the idea of intermediality. So the idea that when a media is at a between stage, for example, movies going from silent to talkies, there's a moment where all sorts of potentials can happen because it's not fixed. And I quite like to take things into school that maybe, you know, the teacher who's in charge of the media room won't have done before. So the idea of doing a site-specific large-scale projection with an event around it isn't something that normally happens. So drawing on that idea of the intermedial, perhaps something different can emerge in that difference because their expectations are different. So if I work in schools where they've done a lot of animation, there's a very set idea of what a film should look like in terms of animation. If I've got a lot of intensive media stuff, they might want to storyboard. And the teachers might say, oh, we always storyboard the films and then we do it this way and that way. So I think what we tried to do in the Odd project is to open up what media could be and what communication could be. And it always gets quite messy. So I think that's possibly quite a good way to show you these different messy things, because the mess emerges from the sites.
Yes. In fact, one of our ideas, which we were thinking about at the moment, is the relationship between the sites and the thinking, and how theory comes in and out in that. And we're kind of exploring the idea of worldizing, which is this. I'm going off piece now, Steve. You need to shut me up.
Okay, just yeah. Yeah, I think we're both going off piece. What time is it?
How much time have we got, Julian?
Okay, we've got another 10 minutes. Good.
Okay, we'll have to hurry up a bit.
You have a little bit longer, but if we have some questions as well, 10 minutes would be perfect.
Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. Okay.
So maybe if we go back to the to what we did, Kate, and just be really clear about what we did, because that might be quite useful. I was rambling there a little bit. So we made films with the young people. They made them on iPads. They edited them in iMovie. They scripted them, and the theme was what does it feel? What does it is it to feel odd in education? Just basically, we asked them to become researchers for us in our project, and the films that they produced were then they edited them and they were projected onto the building. So we had we had some really interesting stuff happened, and sort of I think some of the most interesting stuff. There was a film that was made about difference in terms of a group decided that being really good at something made you odd. So being really good at maths made you really odd, or being really good at dancing made you really odd. And it was interesting because we weren't really expecting that. So this idea of being a bit of a swot or a bit of a nerd came up, and then another group kind of got very interested in the history of the school and what had been there before. And apparently it had been in the Second World War, it had been a hospital. So they got really interested in that. And then there was lots and lots of stories about, I don't know if anyone remembers it, but when the day that the sun went orange was about 6 weeks before we went in. So that there was big conversations about the sun going orange, which was apparently sandstorms from the Sahara. So it very much was the young people's ideas that emerged. Oh yeah, there was a film made about the trampoline, and lots of discussions from the young people about odd stuff happening on the trampoline, which really made us think about, I don't know if anyone's got kids, but it's kind of, the trampolines are really weird. It's like the kids and bouncy castles. You know, I've got memories of trampolines and bouncy castles. There's a kind of liminal space of edginess where kids somehow are left when parents want to drink beer in the sun or not drink beer in the sun. So it was really interesting what emerged, and the themes that emerged, and then how that was articulated in the films that the young people made. So we were really pleased in how that happened. And because we were doing research, we then revisited and talked to the young people quite extensively about what their ideas were, and recorded that, and really made them complicit in those discussions, and like why we were doing those discussions and what it was for. So yeah, that's okay. Okay, we've got a film to watch as well, haven't we? So we better
Yeah. So this is a bit from one of the films. They also used puppets, and they did lots of. One of the films was called Snowman Does the Floss. I remember that. Fake ice cream, dreaming. There was quite a lot about backwards. I sat in a darkened room with a sheet over me for a ghost film. There was quite a lot of trying stuff out. So what if you did running while playing football and dancing? Smashing. There was something about smashing a window pane. They had that quality of thinking in a film that I think is really, really interesting. And I think some of them, like the fake ice cream, were actually exploring things that is kind of interesting to think about what is real, the realness of the world and the non-realness of the world. And when we went back and sat with them, we sat with them in groups of about 6 with a 3D camera. Not all of them actually let the camera happen because they said no, but there were quite interesting reflections on that and what it meant. So we've tried to think about what we were doing. We couldn't describe it. So we think what we were doing was called research creation, which is an approach that comes from Canada that looks at the process of doing something as much as the outputs, and seeing research creation, seeing this as research creation offered as a process model for what we were trying to do. And we have got like some references at the end. The term comes from Canada, where I think it's been used as a way of validating the kind of practices research plus research way of doing things. And I know here we've got practices research quite strongly embedded, but I think it might be interesting to try. We've been trying out that idea to describe what we do. What we think it does is that it's embedded within the doing of the project. And part of the reason you've got this text is this time last year, it was lockdown. And I was like, you know, at the beginning of lockdown, no one had anything to do. It seems weird now. We had loads to do, in fact. But Steve said I had to read some really hard bits of reading. And one of the things I read was Manning and Masumi Thought in the Act. Do you remember that, Steve? It was really hard. And then I had to read something by Deleuze, which I'm not going to mention at all in this talk because it was too hard. But it was an opportunity. That reading has been helpful in thinking for this keynote about this idea of research creation being something that described the in-act process of doing, so that the films themselves were in process. Have I got that right, Steve?
I think that put simply is not having a clue what's going to happen is really, really productive. And not having a clue what's going to happen requires quite a lot of structures, scaffolds around it, so you don't just, and as we've probably got lots of teachers in the audience, and I don't think we have crashed and burned today, but there's always the potential of crashing and burning. And I think that's what research creation kind of is part of that scaffold. Not that we felt like we set out to do research creation, but just there's some thinking within it that helps you, just say, helps you work without research questions, helps you work without some of the common drivers that you are expected to have, and gives you an argument. If somebody says, well, what's your research question? To say, well, actually, we don't start with the research question, because we find that we often find out what we already know if we're driven completely by a research question. And it's quite hard to say that without any scaffolding, because it can come out as being a little bit naive, and yeah, you can get shot down in flames quite easily. So I think we were working through research creation, and Kate's written a lot about affect and feelings and emotions and in literacies. So I think we're looking for something that counters some of the more positivist approaches to research and education, because we feel that sometimes when you encounter young people's lives, those modes of extraction and division just don't account for what young people are feeling and doing. And personally, I find it, what we do to young people sometimes in education, I find it really frightening, having 3 children of my own, and the systems that are in place that most really good educationalists work with and fight, and are great teachers. But I think we do need to counter to some of the very scientific understandings of growing up and what it is to be a child. So I think that's where we looked to. It's a complicated set of books. I think if you're going to start off, read Man in a Minor Gesture, and she kind of lays it out there quite well in the first 2 chapters, and that's probably all you'd have to read. But yeah, that would be my advice. But yeah, shall we watch the film, Kate? Because I think we're going to.
Yeah, we don't want to run over. Basically, what we're going to do is show you a film which started with a small piece of talk when we were talking about what we learnt. And one of the boys said that he learnt how to catch a locust off a teacher's back. And I suppose one of the things we're interested in is the way in which stories, and this is going back to the theme of the conference, the stories opened up a space that was kind of open and embraced things happening that couldn't be expected. And I think that's what we loved about the Odd Project. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing and show the film, which I think I can do, and then we have one more quote, then we're finished. So I'm going to share the screen and go into the film, and I'll go back to the beginning, and I'll just show it for a little bit. I don't know how long it is, Steve.
You've got to show the whole film after this.
Okay, so we've got one last quote, which I think we only added this morning because we decided we needed one more quote. Oh,
That's the next thing.
have I done something?
Good evening. Good evening. How are you? Are you good?
Turn your film off.
Great. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Sorry, I don't know how to do these things. Sorry, everybody. I'll turn that off. So this is me being very, very hopeless. There we go. I've done it now, Steve.
Okay, put the screen back on.
Sorry, everybody.
Can you edit the recording, Julian, when you get it?
I knew we'd mess up. At one point, we would mess up. That was the mess up, everybody. I'm really sorry. It's because I'm all on my own and I've only got the cat. I did have my daughter, but she's gone back to Liverpool. Okay, so this is the very last bit. This is from Raymond Williams towards 2000. It's only in a shared belief and insistence that there are, actually, I can't see these bits of words, so I'm going to read from the actual book because I can't see the bits of words there. Practical alternatives that the balance of forces and chances begins to alter. Once the inevitabilities are challenged, we begin gathering our resources for a journey of hope. If there are no easy answers, there are still available and discoverable hard answers, and it is these that we can now learn to make and share. This has been from the beginning the sense and the impulse of the long revolution. And thank you to everybody for listening. I think that's it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry about the film thing. It just shows how unexpected things can happen. I'm sorry, Steve.
No, it's fine. Just lucky it was something unoffensive that came on afterwards. Noisy.
It's just one of those things about being at a media education conference. We should have it should be part of the whole thing, isn't it? That's what happens.
Thank you so much. That was brilliant. And as expected, but there are questions that are in the chat and I'm going to scroll up to the first one asked and then scroll back down. So we have about 15 minutes actually. So we've got a nice amount of time for questions. So here's one. I love the lightness and creativity in all the projects that you've mentioned. Do you have a tip for some specific activity that helps you trigger the fantasy stroke imagination of the participants at the beginning of such projects?
That's a really good question. I was thinking, my thought immediately went to those analytic discussions, which at the beginning I said to Steve, we should bring in objects. Do you remember the first one in December? We brought in objects because we thought we should get them talking, and it descended into slight chaos and they did TikTok videos. And then we decided to have a rubric to make them do something a bit more structured. And in the end, and this is when we really did have these weird coughs, actually what worked best was not doing, well, we did the rubric, but things just spooling. And it's a really hard thing to balance that. It's a really good question because I always do want to do exciting interventions. And I do remember one of the teachers saying that they didn't think the children would have ideas. And that was something that we were very upset about, but we actually knew that that wasn't the case, but it was that thing of holding the line. I don't know, what do you think, Steve?
Yeah, I was just going to say that the holding the line thing comes from the beginning of Gladiator. I don't know, most people must have seen the film Gladiator. Kate probably hasn't.
No.
But there's a fantastic battle scene at the beginning and Russell Crowe is riding on his horse against all the barbarian hordes and he just keeps shouting, hold the line, hold the line, as a sort of charge at the kind of barbarians. And I always use that. Normally, if I'm doing media conferences, I've got little clips of film. It's one of my little clips that I show about holding the line. And I think that the flip side of that is a plumbing analogy. When I first started plumbing, I realised that unless you could put right what you do wrong, you couldn't really do very much. So when you plumb, there's always a point where if you're trying to get a tap off, you'll snap it off completely because or you won't be able to get it off because you won't be able to pull it hard enough to get it off. And I think that kind of being able to put things right, especially with teachers alongside, is, so if you have 20 minutes where the kids really aren't engaged and they just sort of seem to be you know, we had occasions, just the ability with teachers to be able to bring things back on track, which might be a little bit more structure or a bit of a break or whatever it is, to feed in at the right point. And I think, you know, teachers, there's a myth that teachers have got everything planned down to the next minute. Actually, when you're in the classroom, teachers are fantastic improvisers. So I think that's my advice. I don't think there's any cookbook sort of tips, other than I've never found anything that's more accessible than doing collage with you know, with magazines or pictures or whatever, because you don't really have that blank sheet of paper or that set of expectations that you're going to make something that's brilliant. You know, you might get lots of people who sort of say, you know, drawing, just do a drawing on white paper, but so many people bring all sorts of anxieties to that space, whereas interestingly enough, collaging just seems to break down those boundaries. You can do it seriously, you can do it playfully, you can do it abstractly, you can use text. So if I was going to give a tip like what to try out, I'd say collect loads of interesting magazines and do a really large collage in a practical way, because I've never ever had that go wrong. Whereas, you know, stuff like if you're using clay, or, you know, if you're using balloons, there's always somebody that's got balloon phobias that you forget about, and there's all sorts of things. Whereas, yeah, the practical tip: get out the Prit. Oh, and the other practical: never buy generic Prit. It doesn't work. And don't use glitter. That's the third thing. So collage: never buy generic Prit, only buy real Prit, and never use glitter, or the school caretaker will be after you on your way out.
Thank you. I'm going to try and get through like 3 more in the 10 minutes we have. There's quite a lot there, so apologies if I don't get through. I'm going to kind of go up to first come, first served in a way. So Mari asked, or commented, interesting how perceptive children were in their responses to what odd was, in terms of them being clearly recognizing like a norm. So do you want to comment a bit on how children recognized the odd, or how they responded to the notion of the odd?
I mean, it's funny because I would love to show you some of the films of the children talking about odd. I remember one of the children saying, "I love odd, it's what I am." And that it really affirmed her. But then other children sort of shying out from this idea of them as odd and thinking that isn't it odd, that could get you into think about ghost stories. I mean, one of the things I remember is it quite quickly is, isn't it odd that there's a strange thing there and there? And we made some stories up. We did these stories called The Hundreds, where we responded to their odd stories with our own responses to their stories. And there was something about the seeing the same man every day. Do you remember that, Steve? Yeah, that story of the same man every day. And some of them, we thought of showing you some of the stories, but we didn't in the end. We sort of resisted them, this children being the show and tell bit of the keynote, which was quite hard because it would have been fun, but that wasn't the point. But I don't know, Steve, what do you think?
Well, yeah, when we first started off, there was a lot of stuff about odd stories, and one of the, it's really interesting that Kate said I was going to tell stories. So one of the stories I could maybe share is a story about somebody told us, I think they were in year 1, about their sister going back to Pakistan and going into the kitchen and getting a drink of water, and there'd been a lizard in the jug of water, and swallowing the lizard and going into a tummy. And I think we were really cautious at the beginning that we didn't want oddness as we called it sticky. So, you know, obviously you don't want to be pointed out as the odd child or the odd one out or the person doing something odd. But I think that amazingly, and it's a good question, because I think if you asked me, I would say that the children's responses were really nuanced. They kind of understood it. They kind of understood that lots of things at home were different to what happened at school, and that, you know, there was normal things and things that were abnormal. Like Kate was saying, like the ghost stories, it didn't take much to open up that world that's going on, the world of childhood that's slightly different, that's going on parallel to the world of school, that everybody, including teachers, that seem to be quite complicit within. And I think, yeah, it's really good that we stuck with odd as a theme, and it really did kind of give this kind of focus without having to direct a focus. I was quite fascinated, because I was a little worried at the beginning, been the father of two rather odd children, I wouldn't have liked to have gone into school and somebody had said that they were odd. So I think it's hats off to the school as well, because I don't think it could work in any school. I think the school's been amazing. The head teacher's been amazing, really, really helpful, and the class teachers have been amazing to work with. So yeah.
To follow up straight on that point, Pete Bennett asks whether in your work you kind of feel that tension between government reform, curriculum constraint, and then lived experience of children. In Pete's words, these student lived experience has been kind of remorselessly and viciously removed from proper education, in inverted commas. I mean, I guess you do feel that tension, but can you comment on that, please?
I love that, Pete. I mean, when I read that, I went, wow, hey. I think that one of the things that's exciting about working in actual schools with actual teachers is they are extraordinary. So we had our planning meeting with the teachers about 3 weeks ago, and the Zoom went on, and there were these two teachers, and they had these enormous red noses and funny hats, and we just thought, wow, the teachers are just not normal, and the world isn't normal anymore. What? I know it's red nose. It was still like quite interesting, and I also think there's something about. I actually think this COVID space. I had a meeting yesterday about COVID keepers. What we're going to keep. I think we're going to break that stranglehold. I'm actually quite into the revolution, which is why we put Rowan Williams in. I think we're going to have to push back because it no longer makes any sense. We've had a year of home. And I think that there's ways in which that learning will come out very slowly of what that meant for children, young people, and what that meant for teachers, and what that meant for schools. And I think what I'm hoping is that schools will hold on to some of the good bits and resist some of the bits that really never made any sense. But you never know. I don't know. What do you think, Steve?
Well, I think to go back to Williams, the bit of Williams I could probably quote without reading it is to gather together the resources for a journey of hope. I think, when that question makes me feel quite angry and quite political, but I'm involved in, hopefully to as big an extent as I can, to be part of reforming education from the inside. I've got massive respect for anybody that is a teacher. I've got massive respect for education as a whole and as a profession. So certain things do make me really sad and really angry. But to go back to Bloch, one of the things I took from an earlier project is Bloch's idea of a concrete utopia as compared to an abstract utopia, which really simply is what Bloch says is that the abstract utopia is just pie in the sky. Wouldn't it be great if things were a bit different? Wouldn't it be great if things were a bit better? Whereas a concrete utopia is something that we enact by trying to build it. So I think for me that is, to take those two things, the gathering together the resources of hope, but actually trying to do the best you can to enact it. So I go into schools and hope that kids have fun and they sort of, maybe become more creators and question what they consume. But I feel I'm actively part of education inside it, a reformist, rather than outside it being really angry about it. But some days I do find it hard not to be angry when I kind of watch the news and everyone's so worried that kids have missed out. I just say, just get rid of the apostrophe. I before E, wherever you like. It's all irrelevant, just kids are just suffering, and we need to check ourselves, and the adult world needs to check itself. So two sides, I get angry and I get passionate, but I know that you can't just rage against the machine. So this idea of trying to build things back better, although I borrow that probably from Cummins and not from Boris, I think there's truth in that. So yeah, but a good
And, yeah, one more I want to get in because it's a great question, and it comes from Becky Parry. I mean, you two are kind of influential in your work. I think I can say without being kind of too sycophantic. So probably quite a lot of people in the conference would have, referenced you and been influenced by your work. But Becky asks, what existing research into film production in schools or with children has most influenced your work?
Becky's book.
Becky's book.
Put it on the shelf.
We've got it on the shelf. Should we get it?
Yeah.
I've got it here.
Let's get it.
Should we go and get it? I think the truth is that I think practice is. I'm just going to show some other. And there's another book that I found really helpful. It's this, but I don't know if anyone else has heard of it, but it's really good. It's It's by somebody called Pete Bennett, Julian McDougall, and John Potter. I don't know anything about them, but I found that useful.
Yeah, this now looks like a horribly staged moment, but
No, I can't find it.
I mean, I think though I'm not very good at film. In fact, when I started working with Steve, I really hated film because I still think there's a real problem with film, and I'm quite nervous of film, partly because of sexism and girls. And so, I mean, I really like the work of people like Jackie Marsh thinking about children in popular culture. And I got into film because it seemed to be what you did when you wanted to work with children. And I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew I wanted to work within children's spaces and outside the framings of schooled practice.
Yeah, and I would say that I'm really pleased to be talking at a media conference, but I wouldn't say, and I'm a visual artist, fine artist by training, and again, I'm really interested in medias that cross over in between spaces. I'm interested in philosophy and the philosophy of film and representation. But I mean, I have got Becky's book, and I do read it, but I wouldn't say that's my field. It's not the field I'm researching. I'm more interested in. I've just got this. I've just got Lazarati's video philosophy, just to try and be.
This is good. Critical Youth Research in Education, Arshad Ali and Teresa McCartney, Methodologies of Praxis and Care. I think it's quite all over the literature in an interesting way. It was a really good question, that, and I think, yeah, this is a good space to talk about it. So that's why it's a really good question.
I suppose I resist, not for any, not because I think it's good or bad, but I resist creative methods within qualitative research. So I kind of, if somebody says, "Oh, is that what you're doing? You're using a bit of film in a sort of triangulating it within quote and post quote research," I really resist that in a sort of vaguely political way. So I suppose I don't really draw on literature of people who use film within educational research. I don't really read it, and I don't. I'm actually sounding critical of it when I'm saying it, but I genuinely think it's great to use film within different media within research and gathering data, but it's not something that I centralize in the way I think about things. So I admittedly am probably not as well read as maybe I should be in that field, but I just like to get in there and just see what can happen when you start working with that stuff. And I think, in terms of what I've written, I think lots of what I write would probably go back to film in the everyday. So sort of like the way that young people are generating media and sharing it out of the mainstream. That's kind of where my interest is, and what that is. What does that actually mean? What's been produced? What's been shared? What's it doing, and how can maybe we tap into what children are doing already in their everyday lives, rather than what has large scale media production to offer education, which is another thing. So yeah, but it is a good question. It did make me think.
Great, yeah, thank you, everybody. Oh, go on, Kate. Sorry.
No. I'm sorry for the shameless plug of your book, but it was quite fun to do. It's funny being at home because no one can say stop, but it probably is time to stop, isn't it?
Stop. No, thank you so much. And I've got some boring housekeeping, not boring, important, but not as interesting as this housekeeping announcements to make. So before I go into that, let's all give a round of applause through whatever means you want to express it. I'll do it with actual hands and sound.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Absolutely fantastic. But everyone, hang on for 1 second for the housekeeping. We now have a 9-minute comfort break. The breakout rooms will then